Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. And I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and we are going to do that exploration of the old railroads. Let me extend a greeting to all Prime Explorers, viewers, and all others joining us. So we've looked at the railroads a couple times in the past with some of the technology explorations that we've done. And in those explorations, we've found that there is the development of steam engines, or that whole concept of the Industrial Revolution. Now, we've looked at the plethora of variants of steam engines before, such as the coreless steam engine pictured here. Although, is this a demo? Is this just something really nice? I'm always impressed by how wonderfully clean and amazing these things look, especially during a time frame, the 1800s, where we see many images where things just don't look that clean. And I understand there was a lot of dust all over the place for various reasons. There was coal burning, and there were other things going on for things to be dirty. But we always have these wonderful demo photos showing this equipment in pristine condition, and I just find it interesting. So yes, the steam engine. But have you ever heard of traction engines? Or, in essence, a tractor that operated on a steam engine? Does anybody know exactly when this incredible piece of equipment actually went into service, according to our official historical timeline? Because I'm actually going off with something here about the traction engine, as they called it. And it oddly enough shows up in a very unique place. And it's really good to see everybody. I'm glad everybody could make it here. And Dallas posits 1910. Not a bad guess. Officially, it's actually much earlier than that. Yes, I would expect the early 1900s. That would have been my guess too, Dallas. So, yep, early 20th century. So officially, not to keep beating around the bush on this one, the traction engine was invented and commercially viable in the late 1850s. Commercially viable. I know I said that a little quickly, so let me slow down. Yes, the 1850s, they had a traction engine that worked. Now think about this. This is a tractor that was operational before the United States Civil War. And yet, oddly enough, we're informed that the first heavy machinery that could really do a lot of earth moving was not around until the 1890s. And yet, this is one of those little inconsistencies that we have with the historical account. Now, of course, it's downplayed. Well, it was just a traction engine, it was only for use by farming. But if you really had this from the United States Civil War onward, and yes, they had traction engines in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and the United States and many other nations at that time, wouldn't you expect to see them employed and used, especially in a military fashion? This could solve all your logistical issues, hauling around your munitions. Just think about it. Custer's result at the Bighorn could have been much different if he had a logistical wagon train, actually of traction steam engines, such as this, holding those Gatling guns and all the ammunition that they required. Battle of Little Bighorn would have turned out completely differently. Not to joke about the differing war results, but why is it we have this conflicting account of the availability of this traction engine? And same technology, steam-driven engine, just like all the trains that we're going to be looking at. And why am I highlighting this? Because this is another one of those incredible inconsistencies that we had. Why didn't the traction engine take off? Why didn't we have all kinds of vehicles, or that concept, if you will, of the wild, wild west with that advanced technology during the Western times, or the Old West, or the Ancient West, as they say in Star Trek, for the United States, or really the rest of the world? It would sort out all your issues. But for whatever reason, the traction engine just didn't catch on. And then it just seemed to kind of disappear by the 1920s, because then they had the gasoline powered, or the internal combustion engine powered tractors. And it's really odd when you look and see what farmers were actually using in photos and even in recorded family histories, and no one will tell you anything about a traction engine. So just keep that in mind. It's one of those little inconsistencies that we have as we dive into this. So we're going back to the 1800s, and how exactly did they manufacture all of these impressive locomotives? That's one of the things we're going to look at in this exploration. We're also going to look at some of the impressive infrastructure, because, to get a train track going and to operate a railroad, especially the extensive railroad in both Great Britain and the United States, even more so because of the vast expanses of land, you need to be able to construct some locomotives, quite a few of them. You also need to be able to construct train cars for said locomotives to pull on the track. But these are the kind of images that we have. Make of them what you will. What was the industrial capacity? How was it the Industrial Revolution jumped in the way that it did? There's also this other little interesting tidbit here about the United States that applies currently, and that is the fact that the United States does not presently have a high-speed rail officially. Yeah, they've got Amtrak and they can do about 150, 160 miles per hour, but it does not match the high-speed train that's available in China to this day, the old Shanghai maglev, which can do north of 280 miles per hour. Now, why is that? Well, there's apparently political challenges in the United States. And even though Lyndon Johnson signed into legislation and act in the 1960s, in between all that urban renewal, for whatever reason, they just never got the high speed rail off the ground in the United States. And there's a plethora of reasons for it. So, yes, the largest economy in the world, once again, that can spend the most money every year, just doesn't have the money or the will to do a high speed rail. And of course, we can debate it till we're blue in the face. I just thought it was kind of interesting. It was something I wasn't initially aware of. But you look at some of the other variants that we have of trains. Now, I picked this example from Argentina because here we actually have a narrow gauge rail. In other words, the rails are pretty close together. Very intriguing. And yet it was a feasible design. And oddly enough, it wasn't something that we saw used a lot of. Now, apparently there was a narrow gauge in the southern states, or the defeated former Confederate States of America, however you want to title it, but the South. And the gauge had to be moved. And you may recall in our earlier rail exploration, they managed to move the gauge, 11,000 miles worth of track in 36 hours. Again, there was nothing they couldn't do in the 1800s. It was all good planning. At least that's what people have you believe. So, yeah, exactly, Joe. High-speed bullet trains. And maybe the reason we don't have the high-speed train in the United States is the same reason why we don't have the Concorde anymore. It's just not economically viable, right? So, but anyway, all these steam engines, all these train variants, and all this innovated in a very short amount of time. And if you look around, you can actually find some very dramatic examples of the old locomotives that they've had from different time frames. And one of the most interesting ones I saw was actually in Minnesota when I was traveling through that particular state. They actually had a very, very large locomotive. And it certainly didn't look like this one. That looked like it was about 1,000 years old and just slowly rotting. It was kept in very pristine condition, but the technology on it was very, very impressive for the time frame. And again, trying to deconflict, why is it that we had this traction engine, these steam-driven tractors, but yet that technology didn't take off? You think that would have been the mainstay technology of the 1800s. And in fact, if that was actually stated in the historical account, that might answer many of the questions that we have about logistical challenges. But nope, we don't have it. It didn't take off. Now, here's just another little map showing you some of the plans that they have for the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association. And keep in mind, that's all this is. This is an association. But the reason I highlight this is, given the vast expanse of land in the United States, and I'm sure this would apply to Australia too, where you've got just a lot of land and a lot of distance to travel, a high-speed rail would make a lot of sense. It would sort out a lot of transportation issues. But for whatever reason, it's just never gotten off the ground, at least not that we're aware of. So, now, one final thing I'll highlight before we actually dive into the real interesting part of this exploration. This is actually a picture of a traction engine from the nuclear war film Threads, released in the United Kingdom in 1984 on BBC. Yes, after the entire nation was destroyed by nuclear weapons and the population was reduced to medieval levels and there's radiation everywhere and you have a population that doesn't really even speak to each other. Again, I'm just regaling what's shown in the movie, okay? I'm not questioning the veracity of nuclear weapons here. In the movie, nuclear weapons were real. So their entire nation was destroyed, population reduced to medieval levels, and yet in the film, the one thing they make clear is, despite the fact that the population is just completely demoralized and people don't even talk to each other anymore, they were still able to get the traction engine back in service. So I guess it's Trevor the Traction Engine here that we're seeing, but this is actually a still from the film. Now, I don't know if they took this from an older image of an old traction engine in the United Kingdom from the 1800s, early 1900s, but it's just very interesting to think about, because here they are saying, yes, the entire world was destroyed. Civilization has collapsed. The threads have collapsed, but we still have the ability to press a traction engine back into service. Just very, very fascinating when you think about that little inconsistency. Oh, and one final thing before I move on here. This is Stuart Manall. He was a Vice Air Marshal of the Royal Air Force, World War II hero, and also an individual who actually witnessed nuclear tests. If you watch the video, and it's uploaded on YouTube, it's called The Fallout from Threads. He's interviewed a couple times in that particular excerpt. And in both his interviews, he says some very interesting things about witnessing the testing of nuclear weapons, and then also about the probability of a full nuclear exchange. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I strongly recommend it. And pay close attention to how he says things. Keep in mind, this is a career military officer, very well decorated, was also a member of the Order of Bath, the same order that the great naval hero Nelson from Trafalgar was a member of, coincidentally. Yes, he seems to be speaking quite honestly about his experiences, but by all means, listen to him, see what he has to say, watch his expressions, and come to your own conclusions. It's very, very intriguing. So anyway, off of that little tangent there, let's take a look at rail infrastructure. And let's really look at what you need to actually build all these incredible railroads. So we're going to switch gears here and really take a look at this incredible challenge and these very impressive achievements that we have over time. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is exactly what kind of progress in terms of rail construction that we had. And then we'll question it accordingly. Let me make sure I get this map up here and make sure that you can see it all right on full screen. Let me switch. There we go. Here, let me move my icon even. All right. So there you have it. Rail in the United States from 1830 to 1860. Rather intriguing, isn't it? And if you look on the left to the right, you see the progress. And just in summary, what you see is there's virtually no rails at all in the United States until suddenly in 1860. So apparently from 1850 to 1860, virtually all the rails were constructed, because if you see in 1850, there's very, very few rails, really only connecting what is now the East Coast megalopolis as it is today. And that's really all there was. Then all of a sudden in 1860, so from 1850 to 1860, all this massive expansion. Oh, and note, in 1860, there was also a railway from Sacramento to Folsom City, 22 miles. Oh, isn't that impressive? Had to get that going in California right away, I mean, especially with all the 49ers. So just think about that. Really negligible rail tracks, and then in a 10-year period, 1850 to 1860, suddenly tracks all over the eastern portion of the United States, to include what would become the Union and the Confederacy in the Civil War. So that's very interesting. But then going past that, here we have the map showing railroads built by 1870. And again, you see pretty much the entire eastern United States. You've got the one transcontinental line going from San Francisco to Omaha. And then just 20 short years later, take a look. Again, vast expansion. So really think about that. We're saying that basically in a 40-year time frame, there was vast expansion of rail within the United States. And of course, the explanation for that is we had all these rail barons, and we just suddenly had all this capacity to rapidly build tracks. And let's not forget that during this time frame, they also changed the gauge of that 11,000 miles of track. And when you could do that in 36 hours, well, there's no reason to question any of this, is there? It's just amazing, though, to think of how quickly and how fast this all expanded in the United States. So, chassis. My town is supposedly built for a halfway point for the railway between Birmingham and Memphis. That's a very common story, chassis. And in fact, that's the founding story, if you will, of many towns in the United States. To include one that we explore a lot, Ames in Iowa. And we'll be taking a look at a town nearby that, coincidentally. So, Sylvester, they rapidly dug up tracks, not laid. Well, gee, that would make a little bit more sense on the timeline, wouldn't it? So, Jeremiah, yes, we did a little exploration of the Panama Canal. It is quite intriguing. So anyway, all this rapid rail expansion. And then I just thought I would go past that and take a look at how rail expansion has gone from beyond the 1800s. So really you can see here, 1890, virtually all the tracks were filled out. Now they added a few more by 1950. But then today, you can see a vast reduction in the United States, the amount of mileage of rail track. In fact, it peaked in 1950 with 397,000 miles. World War II was over, and we're getting into the Cold War, and I guess everything was vulnerable to those nasty atomic weapons. So they reduced it over time. Or did they? So yes, that's what they tell us. So very, very intriguing. Coincidentally, 1950, right at that period after World War II, when we engaged in urban renewal in the United States, when they were tearing down a lot of those old world buildings all over the cities everywhere. Oddly enough, the railway started to decline in use. And you may recall that was also the explanation for many of those impressive Union stations that we have no longer being used and why they fell into ruins, or they had to be renovated and now serve as the pride and joy of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this is a very early patent to show you rails being used and what they are originally intended for. And what do we have here? Oh, yes, once again, a poor horse dragging these cars across the rail. Do you really think that somebody actually intended this, or that this makes a lot of sense? Now, yes, if you design the concept of the minimalization, and here you actually see it, of the contact of steel on steel, or the actual wheel contacting the track, because think about it, that's the real engineering achievement of railroads, then yes, you can reduce the amount of tractive force required. But does it really ever make sense to have a horse pull it? Does it ever make sense to have a horse pull a trolley? I mean, it's another one of those interesting little things that we see, one of those little details that we have to vigorously question. So, Bulker, not founded yet. Yeah, exactly. Oh, looks like I'm having issues. What a surprise. We'll just come back to the comments here, and there we go. I think we're caught up now. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, it's always the poor horses. They would pull the trains, they would pull the trolleys and everything. But a lot of that didn't make a lot of sense because, it takes a lot to sustain horses. They have a logistical footprint. It's either fuel or food. So, yeah, exactly, Dallas. Stopping would be the biggest problem. So you move on past that. Virtual Holocaust. We used horses in war till World War II. Well, actually, we also have accounts of horses being used. If you read William Craig's book, Enemy at the Gates, most of the German army was still dependent on horses for their logistics. Yes, the mighty mechanized German army of World War II was still dependent on horses, especially in the early years of the war. That's a historical fact. So, yeah, absolutely. Even though they had traction engines, even though they had all these impressive trains, they still had to use horsepower. Very, very interesting. RB, bet it smelled amazing. Oh, you know it. You know it. So anyway, going past this interesting patent, let's take a look at some of the impressive infrastructure, because you can't just build the rails. Remember that trains really don't go up hills very well. There's a very limited percentage of slope, maybe 3%. If you watch that video with James May from Top Gear, he explains it very well. James May was a big fan of trains. But let's look at some of the infrastructure. Rockville Bridge, the longest stone masonry arch railroad bridge in the world, visible to the south, was built between 1900 and 1902. Named for the surrounding small settlement, it has 48 acres and a length of 3,820 feet, well over half a mile. It is the third bridge constructed here by the Pennsylvania Railroad. A wooden structure had been built earlier, followed by an iron bridge. Oh yes, multiple structures. And here's what that beauty looks like, and we've looked at it before. Yes, this very impressive, amazing stone bridge, built again in the early 1900s. So, horses were also prestigious. Yes, they were. Very, very true. So anyway, yes, the impressive rail infrastructure. How do you think they did this? And does this really, really make a lot of sense if we're going off of all this once again? I just don't know. It's always very intriguing to me. And once again, it looks like I'm blind on the comments. It's just that kind of day. That's all right. I'm just going to keep pressing on. Oh, it looks like we're catching up now. So anyways, this is the construction photo. And excuse me for laughing. This is just very, very intriguing to me. So what do you think of this? We've got what appears to be these mobile houses here. And then are these cranes? Is that how they're lifting all these impressive stones in place? I mean, I like how, once again, it's just like with the structures. So how exactly did the stones get out there to be lifted in place? How are the stones so perfectly formed? Well, we're not going to see any pictures of that. We got this very impressive picture, and we shouldn't ask any questions. And maybe not. You know what would come in handy is if they had some of those traction engines for this. And keep in mind, this is 1900. They should have those traction engines available. But no, what do we got? What appears to be these mobile houses with what I think are counterbalance cranes. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just ignorant to what it really is, and I'm fully willing to admit that. If somebody knows, if these are some kind of special technological cranes that just operate in little houses. I mean, we see steam coming out of this, but, is it a steam-powered crane, an early steam-powered crane? Very, very interesting. I mean, once again, you don't see a soul in sight on this image, and maybe there's an individual right here, I suppose. But it's really peculiar when you see some of these images of the construction of these early bridges and so on and so forth. Yeah, Sky Sage says it best. Those bridges are crazy. They definitely are. That's smoke. Oh, so maybe they were burning a fire there to stay warm while they were working. Yeah, that's a possibility. So I'm being completely facetious here, but sometimes you have to be because you just don't know what to make of these images. Now, could well be that, yes, what we're seeing is an honest image, but let's again ask that question. If this was so effective, if they could do this in this manner, then why did we ever let go of this? Why would anybody not want to build a stone bridge? Because guess what? This stone bridge is still in service to this day. And this was built at the start of the 20th century. So why would anybody ever go away from that? Yeah, RB says it. Similar bridges in China and Europe. Absolutely. The numerous viaducts. You got it. So it's just one of those questions that I have. I mean, if it was a capability that was possessed in Pennsylvania, well, then why not use it everywhere? Why not build these impressive stone bridges everywhere? You'd never have to worry about it again. It'd be a great long-term investment. And here you see it, the new stone bridge, Rockville, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Railroad. And here you can really get an appreciation for just how long it is. An entire stone bridge. Let me make sure you can see this because this is a pretty dramatic image here. Yeah, there you go, Michael. Outsourcing to China. Maybe that's what it all was. You know, it's kind of funny because I remember in several railroads, I think the most notorious one being in Boone, Iowa, they actually used a locomotive that was made in China for some reason. So they could be authentic. I'm not really sure about it. So, but yeah, once again, you just have this very, very impressive infrastructure here. Something that we don't build today. Of course, we're given our reasons. We just don't build with stone anymore, even though this bridge is still in operation today. Now, if you take a look at this is the Kate Shelley High Bridge in Boone, Iowa. Now, this was built in the same time frame. Now, while it may not seem as impressive, at the time of its construction, it was one of the highest and longest bridges in the United States, if not the world. Now, you can't see it too well in this picture, but at the bottom of these trestles in this infrastructure here, you actually have some base stones that are made up of larger base stones. So something else very interesting, and you can look up the story of Kate Shelley. We've talked about it before, the heroine from Iowa who managed to save a freight train that was going to crash into the river. Oh, by the way, in this image, what you have right there is the Des Moines River. Just keep that in mind because we'll see some older images. So yes, the Des Moines River, very clearly pictured, and the valley. Now, there are some other interesting images that we have. This is from 1937. And here what you have is one of these stone bridges, but you have a very impressive, dare I say, ultra-modern or futuristic looking train. And that was something that was considered part of futurism at that particular time. Yeah, it's a narrow river, QCZ. Don't worry, it gets better. Wait till we take another look at it. So, yeah, cool locomotive. And they had some very interesting and futuristic designs that were available during that particular time frame. And there's something about this one that, you know, we would expect to see this be the natural progression of technology, but perhaps not. But I just always found this one so interesting because you have a futuristic looking train on one of these stone bridges with the cool arches. And yeah, maybe they had one of those special machines with the steam or smoke coming out of the top of it that built this one too. I don't know. It's just very intriguing. Now, also consider beyond the bridges, we have to tunnel through the hills and the mountains that especially many of those train tracks in the western United States had to go through. Although let's not forget there were train tracks that went through and around the Appalachians. So they obviously had to build tunnels everywhere. The new Cascade Tunnel, 8 miles. Now they say that they had an original one that was built in the early 1900s, but then they completed another one in 1929. Now, we do understand, our official history tells us that there was heavy machinery available in 1929 to excavate, but it's still impressive to think that there were other and older tunnels that had been dug out well before then. You know, again, they obviously weren't using traction engines because that was apparently only showcase technology. You know, yes, we could do it, but we decided not to use it. So that's right, Heidi, 8 miles. No problem. You can dig that out real quickly. RB, yes, the tunnels, they're the mountains, like. Oh, yeah. And frankly, Texas, everywhere you go, there's tunnels everywhere. You have to have tunnels to have trains go through the tunnels because they do not go up hills. They do not go up mountains, especially when they're pulling many cars behind them. So anyway. Oh yeah, there you go, Griff's report. It does look like an Art Deco train, doesn't it? And maybe that's really the time frame it was from. That image was attributed to the 1930s, so the tail end of the Art Deco period in the United States. Who knows for sure? So, hey, Queen Peachy Keen, good to see you. Now let's take a look at some more. So here you can actually see the Great Northern Stevens Pass. Old Cascade Tunnel confirmed in 1900. So somebody had created a tunnel in 1900. Switchbacks done in 1893 to 1900. No problem there. And then the new Cascade Tunnel in 1929. It almost looks like the old Cascade Tunnel is longer than the new one. But, in any event. Maybe it was just easier for them to dig earlier before they had heavy machinery. Or maybe they actually did have heavy machinery. We just don't have knowledge of it. I'm not wondering if there is some sort of inconsistency going on with that traction engine. So, anyway, here's another look at the Kate Shelley Bridge, and this is that one in Iowa, specifically Boone, Iowa. We're not too far from the capital, Des Moines. And here you can kind of see some of the setting stones here on all of these impressive trestles. But then back here, it's like there's no river at all. The mighty Des Moines River is just a creek here. It's just really, really strange to me. I mean, maybe the river was just washed out. By the way, the terrain doesn't really look anything like this. Now, this is attributed to, I think, the 1920s, maybe. So it's really intriguing. I pay attention to things like that, how the terrain looks and what's really going on with it. So, yeah, there you go, Balker. It does look like a sketch, doesn't it? Oh, wait till we look at some other ones. So, anyways, moving on from the Des Moines River here. Here you can see we have another one of these very interesting construction photos. Well, yes, looks like they have steam-powered machines, those same kind of cranes, and that's how they did everything, lifting all the fine details and every beam in place. Although what you won't see is how they got all of these foundation stones that actually bear the weight for these trains going over the tracks in place. But I mean, who'd want to see that? In fact, if you look closely at this image, I won't call it a photo, it looks like they're already in place. Very, very peculiar things about this image. I don't know, maybe it's like I'm seeing things here. The other really odd thing is that you really can't see the river. I mean, unless the river is completely frozen. I mean, maybe. It's just a really interesting image. So this is the Kate Shelley Bridge west of Boone, Iowa, and it's still there, the original one. They built a newer one in 2009, interestingly enough. And then even more strange, here is the first train, apparently, according to the archive, to go across that bridge. Now, the terrain looks very, very strange. I usually use the term desiccated, which means without water, but I'll just say the area looks like it's without a lot of water. Again, this is a river valley, just like in Dubuque and any city off the Mississippi or town off the Mississippi. But it just seems really odd. I mean, maybe it's after winter, but I don't know, very, very strange. And again, trying to ascertain the exact location of the river, I don't really see the river. I mean, maybe it's there and it's very narrow again. Just very, very strange. Series of strange images trying to analyze this particular infrastructure. So, yeah, there you go. Oro Foundation built in snow, maybe. So, there you go, Leo. Only see what they want you to see, and that's pretty much a good way to approach it, beyond any shadow of a doubt. Now, I just showed this image because apparently this was the way in which train tracks or the rails were hastily constructed when the United States was doing its rapid rail expansion. And then the official chronology tells us that they came back in and then filled in the details. They improved these tracks. So really, we're to believe that they had a train that just went on tracks like this, that just had rails balanced on these stones that are just very hastily put in here? Really? I just find that very intriguing. I mean, okay, if they say so, they've got a picture, so we've got to believe it, if that's what's really going on here, or it's not representing something else. Yeah, there you go, Atom Bomb, terrifying. Oh, just wait. Just wait until we look at some of the results of this terrifying infrastructure arrangement a little bit later. So, no, Heidi, I don't really think that. But it's funny just to even think of the possibility and try to have it make sense in your mind. I mean, yes, if you just believe whatever you're told, yeah, I guess you'd think that. But no, I don't think that. So, yeah, there you go, Dallas. That's sketchy looking. Agreed. Anyway, So enough of this sketchy looking image here. And yet you'll see other images like this and these really odd pictures. Now, were they really improving the infrastructure here? I mean, here we've got a horse with some kind of device up here. Hard to really say what's going on with this image, but this is attributed to the archive of the rapid development of the rail. But then in another archive, it says that it's a train accident. So what's really going on in this image? I have no idea. I just thought I would share it because there's two conflicting accounts from archives. And, that happens with photos all the time. And no, I'm not going to say that necessarily proves anything. It's just interesting. Sure, people can make mistakes. And it's an interesting photo. Now, of course, we've got people posing by the very recently constructed tunnel that we looked at earlier. Although, once again, the tunnel looks like it's been there for a while. But maybe that's me, just built things in a dirty manner in the 1920s. And we still have the same crew just standing around with their hats on, although we don't have top hats anymore. In the late 1920s. Yet, oddly enough, why did the tracks look so old and so worn? I don't know. Very, very strange. That was just brand new. But, things can get old really quickly, especially during that time frame. And then here's a postcard of the earlier tunnel. The one from 1900, the Great Northern Railway, the Cascade Tunnel. And oddly enough, and you've seen this with many of the older tunnels from the 1800s, they have more of a developed infrastructure. There's more actual blocks. And remember, done before they had the heavy excavation machinery. Or did they? Again, asking that question. Why is it we have this inconsistency with the traction engines, the steam tractors? And even if they did have steam tractors, how reliable were they? That was apparently another problem. So, hard to really say. Again, conflicting accounts. Yeah, Leo says it very well. It looks ancient. And you can find no shortage of examples of these tunnels and the entryway to these tunnels that look very ancient. So let's roll through some more interesting infrastructure here. Now, this is the current bridge on the right. This is back in Iowa, the Kate Shelley Bridge, west of Boone, Iowa. And here you can see the new bridge constructed in, I think it was 2009. And of course, you got the mighty sky cranes. Yeah, just the best heavy lift equipment that we have available. And that's what we build. But here you can see the older Kate Shelley Bridge, constructed in 1900. And here you can actually see it. Now these, I'll just call them foundation stones, are large. They're very, very large. So it's kind of interesting to imagine them trying to get these in place, even with that, how shall we say, rudimentary steam cranes that they had on the rails at that time. So it's really hard to say what's going on. I mean, was this founded and did it require repairing? Did they actually rebuild the entire infrastructure of it and put the track? Or again, did they just do some quick repairs and then do some shenaniganry that, with the historical account? I don't know. But it is very, very interesting. It's also interesting that if they just would have built one of those incredible stone bridges like they did in Pennsylvania, they wouldn't have had to build this new one now, would they? They could have saved all kinds of money. So, very intriguing. Now, this is probably one of the most dramatic images. And here we're looking at one of the many impressive viaducts over in the United Kingdom. Now, this is actually a real image. You're looking under one of these viaducts or these impressive rail bridges. Now, obviously made with brick, but look at the alignment of this. It almost looks like you're in a different world. And here's a person here just for your edification. Yeah, there you go, Jason. And it's kind of funny because I can think of some sites, if I tried to hang this image up, they'd say it's an AI image. You'll find there are plenty of examples of people who are doing this now. This used to be a difficult image to find until somebody brought it up. And now there's been many people that have been posing down here to actually take a look and see the alignment of this viaduct. And I mean, when you look closely, you can just get an idea for how well aligned it really is. I mean, really, it's an engineering marvel. Made with brick or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And just seeing it as it goes off into the distance. So some very impressive engineering knowledge. And, they had it in Great Britain in the 1800s too, according to the official historical account. But as I'm fond of saying, make of it what you will. Now you look at some other early images and you'll see a bit of a combination, So here you have the iron beams, but then you have what looks to be the more masonry stones down here. And yeah, don't worry. I'm sure you all like that image. So I'll be sure I hang it on the community page. And if I forget, just remind me. Okay. I've got a lot of things on my mind. I don't forget things intentionally. And then I just thought I'd include this because here in Illinois, this is actually between East Dubuque and Illinois. And we just looked at Dubuque last week. Again, you have another one of these more advanced looking trains. and this was about the 1930s time frame, again from the official chronology of the photo. Although, once again, is this paved? We've got the tracks coming in right here. It's very, very intriguing how riding the train was the mainstay of transportation in the United States, even with the automobile, as Worf would say. But then it just vanished after World War II, diminished quite extensively. And even to this day, that's why I was highlighting earlier, the United States hasn't gone on with the high-speed rail system. So I find that very, very interesting. Anyway, so another advanced train for you to see and look at. And here's some of the construction images that we have. Unknown tunnel dated to 1880. So, do they even know the year? And how exactly were they tunneling this out? Oh, yes, they were just using their sledgehammers and their pickaxes. And if you look, you might see Paul Ingalls and Mr. Edwards from Little House in the Prairie. Looks like we've got everybody in part of this combined crew here. So who knows exactly where this image was taken? And were these individuals really tunneling all this out? Or were, again, they just pressing it back into service? These kind of photos just always interest me. And it seems like we got the whole crew present. And, really aside from just the rundown clothes that they're wearing, you could actually take this picture from today and just put them in modern clothing. Would it really be that different? I don't know. Now, here's another image of that infrastructure that we looked at earlier, the viaduct near London. And here you can actually see it and why you get this very interesting effect when you look down in the middle of it. So one of the places to put on your places to visit list. So I'll be sure I've got the exact location. And like I said, I think it's pretty well known now. You can very easily do a reverse image search. So, hey, QCZ, thank you very much for that. And it's great to see you again. It's great to see everybody here. So, Sky Sage, love Outlaw Josie Wales. Oh, yeah. Clint Eastwood there, one of his best movies. So, but anyway, this is what that viaduct looks like. And again, the viaducts, whether they're all over Europe, Great Britain, France, there's plenty to be found. And don't forget the ones we looked at in Spain, and there's many in Italy. They're all over the place. They have this kind of impressive engineering and this very unique layout. Again, this arch construction, you can see the arches on the side, and then the arches going down the length of the bridge. All very, very impressive. And then even in very isolated places like up in Scotland, they also have constructed impressive viaducts at that time. And again, are they made out of the exact same material that we think of as concrete? Are they stone? Are they masonry? Or are they some more advanced material that we're attributing to something else? Well, if you want an idea, I'd suggest you visit on site and come to your own analysis, like we try to do when we do our own on-site explorations. But seeing some of these impressive viaducts or these rail bridges, I mean, I can never get tired of looking at them because there's many different dimensions to the design. Some are multi-layered, some have many different arches. And, of course, I start with the most dramatic example. I usually save the best for last, but that's okay because I really just wanted to deep dive into this. So, but just think of all this construction that was all attributed to the 1800s. So it wasn't enough that they were using new technology. They were also building this impressive infrastructure using old technology or just using lots of human labor, as they would have us believe. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. I mean, look at the length of the supports on this one and these epic arches. Yep, let's go ride on that train. Wouldn't that be a heck of a view? Maybe that's where we'll take the tour when time comes out. So, yeah, there you go. Divinely made. I agree. It does look divinely made, doesn't it? And guarantee you that's still standing. That's still in operation. And that's just one of those little details that we have when we do these explorations. So anyway, that concludes our rail infrastructure. And you can find no shortage of examples of rail infrastructure, whether it's bridges, the tunnels that are just impressive. And frankly, they're all over the land. They're not limited to the United States, United Kingdom. You can find them anywhere and everywhere. Now that we've looked at all that, let's take a look at one of those inevitable questions that we have, the actual production or the building of locomotives. And what exactly did that look like? And why is that something that tends to be a little more difficult to historically document? I mean, once again, going back to the traction engines, we had those. We know that we had trains for a good long period of time. But do we ever actually see many images or documentation of the construction or production of the locomotives themselves? Because again, what's the use of all these trains if you don't have, or what's the use of all these rails and this infrastructure if you don't have the locomotives? How many locomotives did you really need to build? Now, here we actually have the official statement is these are locomotives under repair. And this is in Crew. Coincidentally, Crew was destroyed in the film Threads. I just thought I'd mention that. Now, I'm not really sure on the date on this photo because it's attributed to 1953, but something about this just looks a lot older, so I'm not really sure. Very, very intriguing though when you look at this compound, and this is just a repair yard. This isn't the actual construction of the locomotives. But 1950s, look at what goes into just repairing and maintaining these engines, these locomotives. Very, very impressive. Now, you have to have a lot of lift capacity. You have to have very large structures. Now, you may recall when we did our technology exploration back in December, we looked at all the rail roundhouses, the vast compounds that they had. Well, here's another vast compound where you're doing repair. This is in Crew. Now, some of these other images are always interesting to me where you see what looks to be these very, very new engines or locomotives, but then in the background, you see some of the old world architecture. Baldwin Locomotive Works. Ah, yes. And then, of course, we've got the cobblestone or the brick road. Looks like we got brick road all the way as far as the eye can see. But then a very, what appears to be brand new engine. Or was it just preserved very well and it wasn't that hard for them to clean? You know, it's always interesting to me when you actually see a piece of equipment, again, these older photos, that looks this pristine. You know, whether it's one of the steam engines or it's an actual locomotive. So just thought I would show it. And here we have the Baldwin Locomotive Works. And you can actually see what this compound really looks like and some very impressive structures in the background. Yes, I know it's just a drawing, but was this really where they constructed these impressive locomotives? Whether we're in Pennsylvania or whether we're in the United Kingdom or really anywhere, it doesn't really matter what our exact location is. Wouldn't it be so interesting if, just like all the great brick foundries or factories that we used to have, if we still had these old locomotive works around where they actually built the locomotives? I would love to see one. I would love to see it a little bit more well documented. I love that engine. Yeah, the sky is really weird, isn't it always in every one of those images? So, mm, yeah, there you go, Atom Bomb. Locomotives. And yes, I'm having some wordplay fun again, but not rolling my consonants together, okay? I annoyed enough people last time on that. So I'll try to keep my shenaniganry to a minimum. And here you actually see it, you know, some of the different variants of the locomotive. Spanish State Railways, mid 1800s. So different types, apparently. Cambrian Railway, I think, 1863. It's just intriguing seeing that there were so many variants to these locomotives or these engines. Indian Branch Railway. And then, of course, you know, what was the actual chronology of development? Were there other larger locomotives? And when you go to some of those isolated locations, and I intend to do an on site of the large one that I saw, and yes, I intend to make that available to everybody. I really want to document the actual development of the locomotive. Yeah, there you go, Jared. I mean, different trim levels. And what's that alluding to? Well, it's difficult to do so many different trim levels. What that's showing is that you have an enhanced manufacturing capability. Now, we know the assembly line was not really utilized until old Henry Ford got it going, although there are conflicting accounts to that. If you remember that armament that they have in Venice, they say they had a rudimentary assembly line available back during the medieval time frame. So who's to know, who's to say? Yeah, there you go, Heidi. So much iron, so many variants. And just looking at these little details and really paying attention to it, we suddenly see, wait a minute, were they really able to build all of these different locomotives? And here, Billy with a great question here. What lifted the parts? Well, we saw what was needed in that 1950 image, a very large, heavy industry crane, equipment that was not available in the 1800s. Again, according to the official historical account. So how did they lift it? Answer, I have no idea. I'm sure it was some technology that was similar, but yet we also understand that it wasn't available. Unless, as Leo says here, they were implementing old world tech. They actually found a construction yard for these locomotives. They got it back into service. or they just had all these locomotives just sitting around, just like we have cars sitting around on infinite lots. And there were certainly a lot of cars sitting around, about 5 years ago. I mean, there still are to this day, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. You just have all this stuff laying around and you find it. Oh, yeah, there you go, Nana. Men were stronger then. Yes, of course. And there were no safety standards and everybody could do anything. Yep. I like that explanation too. May as well just go with that, right? Never mind the fact you should look up what the average size of the human male was for the United States Civil War. A little bit less than what you might think. Now, here's another one of these interesting images showing what one of these compounds might have looked like where they produced locomotives. Now, this could be Baldwin, this could be United Kingdom. It's a sketch. I get it. Anybody could have done the sketch. But it's interesting to think of this massive facility, this massive compound that somebody found, somebody located, and pressed back into service with all these locomotives in and around them. And think about if it was the same thing with the rail houses that we looked at, or the roundhouses as they called them. So you got all these locomotives, all of these cars just sitting all over the place that are pressed back into service. You're even able to get maybe a factory or two where they constructed these locomotives somehow back into service. Maybe it took them a long time. That's what really took all the time. It's just an interesting series of considerations. Chattanooga choo-choo. Oh, that's a good one, Sky Sage. Yep, and I don't forget that Civil War story of that epic train chase, too, that happened right around there. Yeah, here we go. So another look at the Baldwin Locomotive Works, an actual image, again, with nobody in sight, I suppose. But, yeah, Philadelphia. Remember, Philadelphia was the first capital of the United States. And it's one of those little facts that we tend to overlook. Oh, look, another one of those fancy little lights that we saw when we did the Dubuque exploration. Those little lights are everywhere. I guess you need to have one out in front of your Locomotive Works. But just think about this. All this infrastructure and all this capability just to build this massive compound where locomotives were constructed within. And like I said, I would love to be able to take a tour of something like this today and actually see how it was done. You know, if I could go back in time and really see how it was done. But, you know, that would answer all of our questions. So now you do have other places like here in Illinois where you see, again, it's a service shop. So you're not actually witnessing the construction of the locomotives. They're just servicing them. That's what the archive says of the image. So it's just interesting to me why it's so difficult to actually find images that show you locomotive construction from start to finish. In fact, it's easier to find images of construction of buildings that we question. You know, apparently buildings I'm not supposed to question, but, you know, I did. So anyway. Yeah, exactly, Dallas. Crazy. Well, it is how it goes. So. Well, you know, Heidi, you always have to have a basement, and it's part of your foundation, especially if you're anywhere in an area where it gets cold. You need to have a basement. So, anyways. But then here you do see some of these images, and, you know, some of these very dramatic images where we have this very, very large machinery, you know, asking these questions. How exactly was this large machinery constructed? Well, it was a massive foundry. Okay, well, where was the massive foundry? How exactly did they build it to begin with? You know, is this something from the 1920s? I mean, looking at the clothing, I would say this is circa 1920s, but this archive image had no date with it. Surprise, surprise. But was something like this built and implemented in the 1800s? And if so, how the heck was it done? Those are the baseline questions I have. But then when you look at a lot of these images, these facilities that these impressive pieces of equipment are in that are just colossal are always looking like they're in a state of disrepair. I know. They were building things, but it's very strange. Also contrast that with some of the pristine equipment that we've seen in other images. So again, it's really hard to extrapolate exactly what's going on. Yes, if we take the chronology and the description with the photos at face value, of course, it all makes sense. They were using this facility and they put all their effort into maintaining the machinery and said to heck with the building. Fine. You want to accept that? Be my guest. But that's all part of the issue that we have when we're trying to actually answer these questions for how this was done and put the pieces together in a chronology or a sequitur order that actually makes sense. Yeah, there you go, Nana. You said it well. No baseline questions allowed. Questioning is dangerous. Just shut up and accept it. I know. What am I thinking? So, anyway. So that's the first part of our exploration right there. Looking at locomotive production, looking at the infrastructure, and then the history of the steam engine. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some evidence that shows us that there was an abundance of this equipment available. There was also some trouble in using it. So we're going to go on a 2-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to look at some of these very dramatic uses of this equipment. Now, you may have heard of it, but maybe you haven't. So anyway, prior to going on break, please hit that like button. Appreciate you being here and supporting the channel. And we will be back in 2 minutes. And we're going to look at some interesting rail collisions. And we're also going to look at some rail accidents that might just be a little bit more paramount than you might like to think. So hit that like button, and we'll see you in 2 minutes. All right, so let me give everybody a chance to get logged back on, and now we're going to take a look at one of our most interesting little components of this particular story, and that is evidence of a vast surplus of engines. Oh boy. And this is where the story really gets interesting, as if it already wasn't interesting enough. So let's get up our images here. And I just thought I would start with this little tidbit here, because this is something that we think about with modern rail, although it's a point of contention, isn't it always? And what is that? Well, it's the fact that modern rail is considered very safe. Trains are one of the safest forms of transportation. And so that's what's stated. And there are figures that back it up. And, of course, we know that the car is one of the most dangerous ways to travel. But, especially in America, we love our cars. I remember when Tom Skerritt even said it as mayor of Seattle. And what was that film? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing another blank. Kidding. Singles. Anyways, car, ferry. Wow, who would have thought the ferry was that dangerous? But, you got the train, the subway, the bus. Oh, look how safe the plane is. Yeah. Definitely the way to travel, right? Take the plane. Although it might not be the most convenient way to travel these days. All right, so here's what we have. An image from 1900. And you've probably seen video of this, and has been covered before, where for entertainment purposes, locomotives, these engines that apparently were difficult to construct, were crashed together for entertainment purposes. Vaughn, the general has a funny story, not the one in Dukes of Hazzard. Isn't that the truth? So you have all these train crashes going on for entertainment purposes. Now, why would anybody do this? Why would this ever be considered a good idea? Now I know we'll be expected to believe that yes, because people during this time frame weren't very responsible and they didn't care about safety. But there's something conflicting here. You're not going to be a successful capitalist. You're not going to be a successful expanding nation if you waste your resources. It doesn't matter what economic system you abide by. So, are we really to believe that people just crashed locomotives together because there were just so many of them and it was for entertainment purposes? Or is it just because there were so many of them they didn't know what to actually do with them? Now, could you imagine people doing this with cars? And I know what you're going to say. Yes, they do it all the time with cars. Monster truck rallies. Haven't you seen one? Yes, I absolutely have. But it's very, very intriguing to think of how well documented this process is. And it's not hard to find video, photos of these locomotives being crashed together. I mean, even in seeing images like this, and yes, this is a still image, a rather poor still image of those trains being crashed together. So, yeah, there you go, Adam Bomb. Needed more scrap metal because, we just didn't have enough. So, start crashing them together. Oh, that's a good comment there, Marine. Monster trains. Yeah, get a lot of people to show up to that. So, and that's what it comes down to. Good comment right there. Racing history, absolutely. And a lot of that is what it is. And if you think about it, how are you going to get rid of all those variants of trains? Somebody might ask some questions. So we'll catalog them, but we'll just destroy them by ramming them together. Now, here's where this gets even more interesting. And I'm not going to show you the actual statistics because it's kind of dull to look at. But what you'll find when you look at train accidents is that every single train accident is very well documented. But it's broken down as follows. You've got all the train accidents that occurred before 1880, which are very few. And then you've got a metric ton of them that occurred after 1880. And it seemed that 1900 to 1910 was the heaviest time of train accidents. Now, how exactly does one have a train accident happen where a train actually crashes through the side of a building? And I mean, here it's clearly an old world building and leaves all this rubble. What exactly happened to cause that? It's just very strange, but it's a very common occurrence, as are all of these train accidents. Oh, yes. Look at this. I think we're in Connecticut here because I do believe I recognize the Connecticut State Capitol in the background there. And once again, we have another one of these trains that looks like it crashed out the side of one of the very impressively built roundhouses. I mean, look at all those stones there. What are these guys doing? Are they trying to push the locomotive back in the building? Just keep pushing, Billy. Just keep pushing. We'll have it back there in no time. Because that's all it takes. Locomotives aren't that heavy. What do we got here? Just random gawkers in the windows? Hey, look at those fools trying to push a locomotive back in there. Some of these images are just so intriguing. I mean, how did this happen in the first place? Just don't bother asking. Looks like we got windows, but they look dusty and dirty. And oh, look at this nice big crack here. So yeah, full force impact. Or is it in the photo? Hard to tell, right? I mean, even the Connecticut State Capitol almost looks ghostly in the background. Just so interesting. I know limitations of photography at the time, but oh, there you go, Leo. Yeah, they put it in reverse instead of forward. Maybe that's a good explanation. We'll go for that. So, yeah, Gregory says it right here. They couldn't handle the technology. And that's what I think that's the point these images are making. That's the evidence they're showing. They had no idea what the heck they were doing. And let's really take a look at it. I mean, yeah, Sky Sage, we had the controlled crashes for entertainment, but what else was going on here? And it's like, here you have all these people who are trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And that's what we're asking the question on. These train wrecks, were they just incompetence, poor equipment and infrastructure? Because you'll see evidence of all the above, but they've been operating trains for decades at this point. Most of these images we're going to look at are from 1900 to 1909. Everybody should know what they're doing, especially in the United States and Great Britain, where most of these images are from. Here we have a New York subway accident, so early train here that just seems to have derailed for no reason. And I'll go through these relatively quickly. We'll look at some of the more dramatic ones. Here in Shrewsbury, 1907. Hard to say what happened here. Just a random derailment, hit a penny on the rails. Of course, we still have the guys walking around with their top hats and their little mustaches and canes. Looks like a train rolled over, Bob. Yep, it's a train. Then you also have examples of the infrastructure collapsing. And why exactly would that happen? Again, were they pressing it into service and didn't exactly know what they were doing? Pasture of castles, some incompetence, mostly controlled demolition. Yeah, we've got evidence of everything going on here. Or was this infrastructure really that old? Or when they tried to improve it, they didn't build it that well? Hmm. So let's look at some more. Oh, yeah, this is a spooky one. Looks like you're going right in the water here. This is an Atlantic City train wreck. Very intriguing since we looked at Atlantic City a couple times, but hey, it looks like they have one of those little steam cranes to try to lift it out. I mean, what would happen if you didn't have one of those little steam cranes? I guess you'd be stuck in the water until the end of time, right? 1906, Atlantic City. And here we have another one. This looks a little frightening. I think this is either in UK or Scotland. Boy, just falling down that nasty hill. What, did one of the cars spontaneously explode? Why is the locomotive facing the other direction? Was it pushing? Very, very strange. Very, very, very strange images. I don't know. Hard to say what to make of a lot of these. And then this one. So the bridge collapse here, or did it just fall off the bridge? Looks like it just fell off the bridge. A little derailment there. So all of these wrecks, different time frames. Now this is an earlier one. This is attributed to 1864. So you would expect there to be some difficulties, but you wouldn't expect there to be this many difficulties in 1900 to 1909. And you can look it up. County's most tragic accident, Camps Creek wreck, June 23rd, 1900. 39 lives, plunged through the washed out culvert, a mile and a half from McDonough. Only 7 passengers and 2 trainmen escaped. After 23 days of rain, the weakened bridge gave away. How exactly did the bridge give away? I'm not really sure. Very, very interesting image. Wasn't somebody checking the infrastructure? Were they not monitoring the weather? They just didn't care about those things in the early 1900s? Wasn't that big of a deal? Hard to say, hard to know. Yeah, it might be that old. You're right. You never do know. And how old would it really be? And did they have any idea? Oh, that's a good one, Carol. Bridge jumping with a train. Yeah, maybe somebody just tried to jump it. Trying to do, never mind. I'm not even going to say it. So let's look at some more because believe me, we got plenty more. Chatsworth horror. They actually call this a horror. Yeah, this does look like a horror. I mean, again, what happened here? Train derailed and rolled over. Train just spontaneously exploded. Train collision. Somebody didn't set their rail chronometer properly or their pocket watches they had back then. And I just love how you have people just standing around gawking. Hey, get our picture. We're going to stand on the wreck where who knows how many people died. You know, it's the 1880s. This is just what we do. Very, very odd. Oh, here we go. Wreck of the Leeds and Newcastle Express. This hits close to home for me, or at least original home. 1907. Looks like this one just fell off the rails, but you know, we have one of these nice little cranes here, little recovery vehicle. Looks like it's steam driven. Where's our traction engines? And again, just a series of gawkers to show up. Well, you know, like they said, there wasn't a lot going on back then. Now, I had to include this one because, you know, we looked at this earlier. Yeah, apparently this was a train that fell wide off the rails here. That would have been quite the terminal fall, wouldn't it? But look at that. The infrastructure didn't fail. See, you just need to build it out of this stone or whatever it actually is. So, you know, the bridge isn't going to fail, but maybe they were running the trains too fast. Yeah, there you go, BC. It does all look dug up, doesn't it? And is that really what we're looking at here? Aqueducts. Aqueducts, viaducts, it's always some kind of duct, isn't it? Yeah, you said it, Leo. I would not want to fall off that either. I wouldn't want to jump off that, even, you know, back towards the actual tunnel, but that's just me. So, yes, just so many examples, and you can look it up how many train accidents we have. Oh, here's an interesting one. I think this one's in France and Paris. I think I recall seeing this on, was it Mr. Big's album cover? I think it was Mr. Big from the early 90s. Yeah, I'm dating myself there. How exactly do you achieve this? Crashing a train all the way out through this very impressive old world building here. I mean, did they jump the tracks? Did it hit a penny on the rail? What exactly happened? I mean, it's utterly bizarre. And this happens a lot more often than you think. I mean, these aren't cars we're talking about here. These are trains by the station. So again, it really gives you the impression, as said earlier, they had no clue what the heck they were doing. How could they have this many accidents happen like this? Yeah, it it just doesn't really make any sense to me. Yeah, KC933 says it very well there. Whiskey Tango Hotel, and I'm with you. Poor maintenance and all sorts of other issues. I mean, what other explanation do we have for all these accidents? And there's so many of them. I mean, they fill pages and pages. Whether it's a train just derailing. I mean, look at this infrastructure. This is very interesting here. I mean, it almost looks like you really are in post-apocalyptic England in this particular picture. They were filming Threads. That's why it looks this way. It's not from the early 1900s. And then here we have another one of these. The Harcourt train wreck, again from 1900, again crashing through a building. I mean, just impressive. How exactly do you achieve this? In so many different situations. I mean, unless they literally had no idea what they were doing, or there was something else behind the photos. But you can find numerous photos of these wrecks very easily. So, yeah, it's very, very intriguing. Just crashing trains through buildings nonstop. And I mean, I can understand the derailments to an extent. I mean, yes, things happen on the train tracks, but of course, we still have the insistence of how safe trains are. But I mean, really, a little individual project, just look it up. How many documented train accidents we have, really from 1880. I mean, they don't stop. They're well documented all the way up until the end of the 20th century. So they're very safe, but yeah, they derail. There's all kinds of massive casualty events that occur with them. But, they're safe now for a variety of reasons. I mean, you look at these images and you just see total destruction. Buildings pulverized, entire train cars destroyed. And we're not talking the official entertainment here. Yeah, there you go, SP. No damage to the train. The train came out okay, right? But yeah, Leo's right. Always so many more questions and answers. Just trying to put this all together and trying to see this from different perspectives. This is a really unique one because this is reported to be a train accident, but it almost looks like they're trying to recover this train down here. I'm not really sure. As though, hey, we found this really old locomotive in the mud and we're trying to recover it. I don't know. Is that what this image is sharing or showing or displaying? Or am I just out of my mind? It really did just fall off the tracks and roll down in the mud, and they just wanted to put a big old chain around it and pull it out of there somehow, some way. I guess they're going to have the poor horses or the oxens do it. Or maybe they would rig up one of those pulley systems that nobody's ever actually rigged up that were theorized to move the gigantic blocks at Baalbek. I don't know. And then some of these other images here. Now, this is one of the earliest train wrecks that was caught on photograph, although you might notice the top of the photograph. It looks like it was touched up by Bob Ross. So I don't know. Maybe he was trying to put some happy things on this photograph, so people would turn their attention away from the train wreck. I always remember that statement from Garfield. John, you look on the bright side of a train wreck. Look at this. So again, just seeing this utter destruction here. Now, maybe in these earlier images, only in operation 10, 20 years, I could understand some more accidents. But after going at it for 70, 80 years after the Transcontinental Railroad, how could they still have all these issues happening? All these wrecks. Railway accident of Sunshine, 1908. Over 40 lives lost. I know it's just sketched on there, but, very well recorded, apparently. And then we just have people looking on. Oh, look. That train just spontaneously exploded. Nice light back there. So, I mean, it goes on, and there's so many different examples. Yeah, there you go, out of the tree. Happy little train wrecks. Yeah, I can't imagine why Bob Ross didn't paint wrecked trains, Imagine how far that would have gone. Hey, Angel Dreams. Well, good to see you. And thanks for showing up. Yeah, there you go. I mean, but this story didn't end up like the Hindenburg. Trains are still in use. And of course, we know why. They are the most efficient means to move logistics across the country. So just very, very interesting trying to put all this together. Anyway, this is Salisbury. Again, early 1900s. Another train accident. Got the crane out to fix it up. And don't you just find this interesting? Oh, and even Russia, they got in on the action too. This is the Russian Imperial train crash of 1888. So everybody was crashing trains everywhere, even after they'd been in service for decades. Very spectacular wrecks, very odd wrecks. Here's one's from 1916. And then another look at this particular image here in France. Wreck of the Cromer Express. And so I'm just making this point. All these wrecks are very well documented. They are recorded in image and they have the 5 W's. So if you look at the catalog of all these wrecks, why is that? I mean, was General Katana the one actually driving these trains all the time? And if anybody gets that reference, I'll be very impressed. But I mean, I'm at a loss to really explain this. I mean, what was Michael Ironside going back in time and just driving trains and crashing them for fun? I've really got no way to actually account for this. So, why are so many people there? Yeah, that's always the question, and it's a good question. So, anyway, just give a little shout out to Michael Ironside. When you know you're in a bad movie, just have a good old time and think you look cool. And boy, did he have a good time. That's from Highlander 2. So, anyway, one little bonus I'm going to show you here. So we'll move on from General Katana / Michael Ironside hamming it up, which is all you can do in a bad movie. I thought I would just show you something because some people say, well, do we have any method of comparison with construction techniques? And I thought I would just show you real quick some pictures of some of the Amish villages. Now, yes, the Amish have some religious beliefs, and based on that, they operate their society in that particular way. But it's intriguing to see what they actually build. They build wooden structures, and they tend to be painted white. And they're relatively simple, as it is a simple lifestyle. So it's interesting looking at the examples, but you'll always know an Amish barn if you see one, whether you're in Illinois, Iowa, or anywhere in the land. And they're built in this very simplistic white wooden format. The point I'm getting at here is, you tend not to see them build these large, impressive stone masonry buildings. You might see a church that's like this, I mean, don't get me wrong, the woodwork that the Amish do is unmatched. And, if you want a cupboard or a cabinet or a drawer or a dresser that's going to last you for the rest of your life, have the Amish build it. Oh, and by the way, if you're into equestrian activities, as somebody may be, they also tend to be good farriers. And let me tell you, finding good farriers is getting very difficult these days. Oh, that's people who put shoes on horses, if you don't know. But anyway, I'm just showing these are the kind of structures that they build and the way they prefer to build them. Now, granted, there's different belief systems and so on and so forth. But then, you look at some old world architecture that happens to be in one of the Amish areas, and whether it's in Pennsylvania or wherever, do you think the Amish actually built this or would ever try to build something like this today? Now, I know people highlight certain examples of structures that they're building in certain locations and say, yes, they're trying to do a showcase of that. I mean, really, could anybody build this structure today with modern equipment? I'd be impressed if they could, But, whenever I try to do comparison videos, crazy things happen. So maybe I should just stop. Hey, QCZ, thank you. I appreciate that. So, but it's one of those things to really think about. What are the actual capabilities? What's the technological capability? Who could really even build something like this? So, yeah, there you go. Horses and buggies. No, the point I'm getting at is they build wooden buildings. That's what they're focused on because that's what the capability they have. Let me move the banner. I'm sorry. The capability is based on what you have available. And this is what you tend to see. Large group of people. Here you got the horses, brought in all the wood and the timber. You can see it happening and building a barn. Or, you can watch Witness with Harrison Ford and watch him build a barn. By the way, did you know that Aragorn's in that movie? Or if you're a fan of 1980s comedy, watch the TV show Sledgehammer, where Sledgehammer ended up marooned with Many Note Village, and he tried to build a barn. He wasn't very good at it. So anyway, it's just one of those interesting things to think about. So a limitation on technology, a limitation on a capability, and this is what the focus is. Building wooden buildings. This is what we'd expect to see from the 1800s during the settling of the United States while there were wars going on. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention, and I'll just mention again here. Hold on. Let me get up that image again that we had that showed our impressive railway expansion in the United States, because, that never ceases to amaze me. Guess I'm just kind of like that. So getting back to that map. Hold on. 1 second. All right. Stop that image and share this image because this really impresses me, and I just want you to keep this in mind. All right. So going back to that time frame when we had that vast rail expansion within the United States. There we go. Remember 1870 to 1890. What exactly was happening 1870 to 1890? What we're saying here is that the vast expansion of railways in the United States, to include the vast expansion of the United States, occurred in this 20-year period. You may recall when we did the exploration of Atlanta. Remember, Atlanta was destroyed completely during the United States Civil War. They managed to build their impressive Capitol building in 4 short years by 1889. It still stands to this day. The railroads were primarily built 1870 to 1890. Now, what was happening in the United States from 1870 to 1890? Well, recall there was the continuing conflict, the Plains Indian Wars, as they called it. There was also this little thing called the Panic of 1871, or the Great Depression before the Great Depression. It was during the Grant presidency, not that it really matters, but so somehow they were able to do all this expansion despite having a large Civil War debt, despite having massive casualties during the Civil War, and despite having economic issues. Now, of course, after our Great Depression, we always have to ask, is it really an economic depression or is it actually an economic opportunity? Those are questions I have to ask. And you may recall in other explorations I've done, those weren't the only downturns. There was the numerous panics that occurred in the 1890s. Yet, despite all that happening, there was no issue with building all of these train tracks and building all these cities. Now, of course, people who defend the mainstream chronology will tell you all you need are rivers and railroads, and everything else makes perfect sense. I guess. Just think about this. If this really happened in this 20-year period, this incredible boom, what they call the Second Industrial Revolution after the United States Civil War, how does it really add up? How does it really make sense? I mean, was the nation devastated or was it not? Oh, yeah, well, that's all part of it, Sky Sage. Although who knows what the real actual players involved were. We'll look at that in a subsequent exploration. So, oh yeah, there you go, Adam. 1871 is the year U.S. passed the Corporate Act of 1871. Well, and don't forget, there's been several key addendums to that. Although, does it really apply or is it just something they're telling us happened? So, anyway, it's just one of those little oddities to think about this vast expansion. And then by 1950, the United States goes away from the railroad. And now, to present day, it doesn't really want anything to do with it. We don't need any high-speed rail. We've got planes. We've got automobiles. We've got the interstate. Yes, the interstate was modeled after the Autobahn, but we have a speed limit on our interstate in the United States. We're all about safety. So, anyways. Well, I hope you enjoyed this exploration on the old railroads, and it gave you a little bit of a different perspective to look at. And please hit the like button and appreciate your support for the channel. And we'll be back with a couple of, how shall we say, unconventional explorations for this upcoming week. Yeah, there you go. The railroad simply moved underground. Yeah, maybe, Sheriff Fortunes, and maybe there is a vast underground railroad. Not the underground railroad we refer to historically, but another kind of underground railroad. So, anyway. Well, I hope y'all enjoy the upcoming week, whatever holiday it is, wherever you are in the land. It just depends. Yes, in the United States, it's Memorial Day weekend, and I know just about everybody's out on vacation for that. Oh, Matt with a good comment here. They don't want you to be able to drive across the USA fast enough to keep up with the sun. That's true. And it seems like they don't want you to take a train faster than that either. So, anyway. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend and your week. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off, and we'll see you on the next exploration.